Welcome to Fresh Start Podcast. I'm Dave Henning. My guest today is Dr. Mark Tinsley. And Mark, you've been called by somebody a Renaissance man because you've got a variety of incredible experiences, from pastor, musician, luthier, which is very cool. I know what that is, actually.
Yeah, you're one of the few.
Yeah, exactly. Soldier and professor. So, Mark, you've got a lot of talents and gifts, and you've dedicated them to serving other people, which is very awesome. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dave.
And you also, you're a family man. Let's see here. You are a husband and a father of 5.
Yes, sir.
Wow. All ages, I take it?
Yep, we go from 15 down to 5. So
okay.
There.
Exciting times for sure.
Definitely.
So we are going to talk today about, and thank you for bringing this up, but this is a very interesting topic, toxic leadership. That's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it?
You would think so, yeah. It does sound like an oxymoron. Yes, it is, because good leaders are not toxic. You're right.
And so what is your definition of toxic leadership? What do you mean by that?
Toxic leadership is leadership. Well, it's not leadership, so I guess we've kind of determined that. But it's anything that does one of two things or both. Demotivates or destroys the individual, or harms the organization, the institution. When a leader is doing things that are harming his or her people, or his or her organization, then that's toxic, because that's what toxins do, right? Toxins destroy. Toxins make things bitter and kill things, and that's what toxic leaders do.
We hear about great leaders in companies who have, now that they're gone, they've achieved a certain amount of fame. But just for example, I was watching a documentary about Thomas Edison, and he was famous for he was married, but he lived in his factory and was quite demanding and so forth. So is that kind of similar to what you're talking about?
So I think there's different types of toxic leadership. And this is what I want to make very clear. I think when we think about toxic leadership, our mind typically goes towards the leader who gets angry, blows up, and makes the workplace very, very difficult because of fear. And that's certainly a type of toxicity. We've all probably had the angry boss or the angry manager or supervisor who likes to dress people up and down in front of everyone else and embarrass them. And definitely that's a toxic leader. I've had that kind of a toxic leader. I had a commander in the Army years and years ago now who was very toxic in that regard. And people were fearful of this guy because they didn't know what he was going to do next or say next to embarrass them. But that's not the typical type of toxicity, or not the only, type of toxicity. There are other types of toxicity. I won't go through them all, but I'm finishing up a book now called Antidote, kind of describing toxic leadership. And I talk in there about different types of toxicity. Toxicity of perfection. The boss who wants perfection. I'm not talking about demanding excellence, but the boss who won't accept anything less than absolutely perfect. And therefore you never get anywhere. You're just sort of always bogged down in do it again, do it again, do it again. That's very demotivating, frustrating for people. There's also the toxicity of silence. The boss who doesn't give you any praise, doesn't give you any feedback. You're just out there doing your thing, wondering, am I doing well? Am I not doing well? Again, can be very frustrating, very damaging to the individual and to the organization. And then I'll just mention one other type of toxicity is toxicity of incompetence. The boss who doesn't really know his or her job and just really brings the organization, demotivates the individuals because they look at this person and go, why is he or she in charge? They don't even know what they're doing. And so there are lots of different types of toxicity. And of course, the really good toxic leaders are the ones that combine many of these together,
right,
and create complex toxicity.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of, I've been in the corporate world a few times where someone is the top salesperson in their company. And because of that, they get promoted to a management position, but they actually don't have management skills. So, it's a typical scenario, quite frankly.
A great example from my background of that is academia, higher education, colleges, universities. You know, we're very credentialist oriented in our society. So we suddenly think if someone has a PhD, they must be smart, which in many cases is true, but in some cases is not. And therefore, if they're smart, they must be great, wonderful, extraordinary leaders. And so, you know, we'll promote people into positions of leadership in academia, provost and president, because they have the right credentials, come from the right university with the right credentials, and they're horrible leaders. In fact, I'll tell you, probably the majority of academics are not gifted as leaders. They're gifted as scholars, they're gifted as writers, they're gifted as teachers, but not leaders. And like you say, we see that whether they're good in the classroom, they're good at writing papers, they must be great leaders. It's often not the case. And of course, I always caveat that when I say it and say there are always obviously lots of great leaders who have big credentials, but we've got to be careful. I agree with you in promoting people based on what they're doing in their occupation and how well they do that. Because I like to take a lesson from the medical field. You know, who are the leaders of hospitals? They're not typically the MDs or the PhDs. They're typically people with business degrees, people that have studied leadership, how to be leaders of medical personnel and medical facilities. And so they may have just a master's degree oftentimes, yet they're leading all the MDs, MD, PhDs that are out there because they're focused on leadership. And they've proven themselves in the business world to be good businessmen and women and good leaders, and they rise that way. I wish as a side note, I wish academia would do the same thing. I wish we would have a separate track for the people who want to lead in academic environments and a track for those who want to be academicians.
If I think back to things like high school and college, leadership is not actually a subject in most cases. It's kind of like balancing your checkbook is not actually a subject either in college. As you are aware, you know, I've been trained with one of the acclaimed leaders in the United States, John Maxwell, who's done a lot of stuff in that area, and he's spoken to military groups and colleges and the NFL and about these principles that actually have to be learned. And for me, that's kind of a lifelong learning process. I'm a lifelong student, basically, still. You know, it's kind of the old adage, you don't know what you don't know, kind of a thing. And so, having said that, and then there's the case where you know what you don't know. Could it be possible that, as you were mentioning, especially in academia, perhaps, that there are people that are, quite frankly, introverts? Just for
yeah, absolutely. Though I think introverts can make great leaders. Extroverts can make great leaders. I don't know that it's a personality type per se, but it is something that and I think it is a skill that can be learned to a certain extent. But it takes a lot of kind of character traits, though, that make a good leader. It's not a personality type. It's not a particular background. It's things like being inspirational. If I want to be a good leader, I need to be able to inspire and motivate people. If I can't inspire and motivate people, no way am I going to be a good leader. There's just no way, because like the Army's definition of leadership is being able to motivate people. So that's one thing. If I want to be a good leader too, I think I need to be creative and innovative. I got to think outside the box. I can't just do things because that's the way they've always been done. I've got to do the right things at the right time. I've got to be strategic. That requires creativity and innovation. And then, of course, I've got to be competent. And then I would add too that I need to be a person of grace and patience and humility. I've got to have those character traits as well, because I've got to realize that even though I'm a leader in any organization, I'm part of that organization. I'm part of a larger organism that has many, many parts. So though I'm functioning as the leader, I still need the guy and the gal at the bottom. I still need the middle managers. I still need all the people in that chain to make the organization fly. If I don't, and that's a perspective of humility. And if I don't believe that in my heart and I don't act it, then I run the risk of being toxic, because, hey, I'm the king on the mountaintop. I'm the wise man on the mountaintop. You come to me if you need anything. I'll come to you if I need anything. Otherwise, I'll leave you alone. You leave me alone, and you do your job. And that's often how toxicity goes when leaders don't see themselves in the right perspective.
How does this relate to expectations? Expectations on the part of the leader or so-called leader, and also expectations on the people and organization that he or she is serving. Would it be fair to say that expectations can be faulty expectations?
I see what you're saying, like unrealistic expectations, those types of things.
Right.
Yeah, I do think that most toxic leaders, to your point, I do think that most toxic leaders do have unrealistic expectations. They either have unrealistic expectations, again, as I was saying a minute ago, of their role and the role of their people, or they have unrealistic expectations of what people can do. I mean, I think about back to Scripture when Pharaoh took away the straw from the Israelites, right, and said, "Build the bricks, but you can't have any straw, and you need to build the same number of bricks that you do in a day." And of course, that was an unrealistic expectation, and the people had trouble doing that. And of course, I think we could describe the Egyptians from Scripture as being pretty toxic. And I do believe that that's what happens, though. Oftentimes, it doesn't start with unrealistic expectations. It starts with character. But character leads to unrealistic expectations. And then toxic leaders, get angry, get silent. The perfectionism, as we talked about, and that comes out in these expectations that people go, I can't do that. I mean, you expect me to write that entire paper or that entire brief in a day? I mean, I can't do a good job and do it in a day. And that creates a frustrating environment. Again, it demotivates the individual. That's toxic. And it, in the long run, harms the organization. That's toxic.
So how important then, having said that, Mark, is communication on all levels so that let there be an understanding so there's no misunderstanding?
Yeah. No, I obviously, I remember when I was in the military, we used to do what they call commander's surveys or command-directed surveys, where they would anonymously survey the soldiers and ask them a bunch of questions about their commander. And of course, we used to do, yeah, exactly. And we used to do the same thing in academia. You'd have these anonymous surveys that would go out by the administration as well. And every time, whether it was in military or academia or any other environment that I've been in, what's the primary negative thing about your leader or your organization or your department? And almost always, one of the top three was communication. They don't communicate well. He doesn't communicate well. She doesn't communicate well. The department doesn't communicate well. So I think people, obviously long for good communication. And if I'm longing for good communication, then I need it. If I'm as a leader not giving my people what they need, if I'm not communicating down my vision, my goals, my objectives, my expectations, my evaluations of performance and all those kinds of things, then there's going to be something lacking. And you're right, it goes the other way too. As employees, we must have the integrity and the moral courage, as it were, to go to our leaders when we have problems and to address those respectfully, obviously. But if I'm having a problem with my supervisor, I need to have the moral courage to go to him or her and say, "Hey, listen, this is just not working for me, and here's why." And keep that two-way communication going. I know it's hard oftentimes for subordinates to do that to their superiors, but we have to do that. If for nothing else, it keeps us a little sane as followers to be able to voice our concerns. As my mom used to say, and as many moms used to say, I'm sure, it's not what you say oftentimes, but how you say it. So,
right. Yeah. How does micromanaging people play into this little challenge, let's call it, of toxic leadership?
So I think that's as I was going through my types of toxicity, that would certainly be a type of toxic leadership is micromanaging. And that is very demotivating. It can be for anybody, but more so for the middle managers and supervisors in your organization than for the grunt, as it were, on the line or in the field. Because if you're a private in the Army or you're a line worker at a factory, you kind of figure that the boss is going to come around every now and then, and the supervisor is going to come around every now and then and kind of tell you what to do, correct you, and that type of thing. But when you're a manager, middle manager, supervisor type, you want that not complete autonomy, obviously, but you want that, hey, let me show my initiative. Let me lead my team, and I'll show you what I can do. And that micromanager never gives you that opportunity. Micromanager is always over your shoulder going, do this, now do this, now do this, now do this, taking all that innovation, creativity, away from the leader, subordinate leader. And you talk about demotivating. If you demotivate and destroy your middle managers and supervisors, you are destroying your organization.
Right, absolutely. So, what's the solution? Or I'm sure there's not a solution in a can that you just pour out and boom, there you got it. You're good to go. So, what are some of the things that can be helpful in redirecting a person who has the potential to be a fantastic, great, inspirational leader, but is maybe stuck in this slot of, at this point, quite frankly, being toxic?
Well, let me tell you, I had a supervisor one time, and I won't say her name because I didn't ask her if I could say it, but I hope she listens to this and she'll know I'm talking about her. She was my dean when I was associate dean at the university. And, you know, if the maximum amount of respect you could have for someone was 20,000 feet of respect, I have 30,000 feet of respect for her. I mean, she's just a wonderful leader, smart as a whip with common sense, which is not all that common. And she has a PhD from a major university. So just a phenomenal person, scholar, leader. She told me one time when I was getting ready to step up into the dean position, I said, just tell me some things, give me some wisdom. And one of the things I remember she told me was promote well. So I think number one with organizations is we've got to make sure we're promoting into positions of leadership the right people. Oftentimes, like you said, we look at, that factory worker is wonderful on the line, so he's going to make a great foreman. And oftentimes it's just not the case. They're good at that skill, but not necessarily good at leadership, because it's two totally different skill sets. So I think we got to make sure that the people that we promote into positions are not only capable of that, but ready for it, because that's two different things. You know, when I was an 18-year-old kid, I was capable of good leadership, but I was not ready for it. So if you'd have put me in charge of anything significant at 18 years old, I would have run it into the ground. Give me 20 years, now I'm ready for a larger mantle of leadership. So that's first of all, and that's not answering your question. I'll answer your particular question here in a second. But I think organizations and leaders need to make sure that they're promoting well. Number two, though, and this goes for anybody, but certainly that person, that avatar you just talked about, the person who's become toxic, how do we help them not be toxic anymore? And that's training. We've got to have training and mentorship. You know, there's a book I want to write when I have the time. And it's about the lack of mentorship, the death of mentorship in the West or in America. You know, apprenticeships and mentorships used to be something that happened, not just professionally, but within families and all that. But we've gotten so darn busy that you don't see older men mentoring younger men or older women mentoring younger women anymore. You don't see inside organizations people mentorship programs. It's just not happening the way that it, quote unquote, used to. We've got to get back to that apprenticeship model, that mentorship model, that training, because oftentimes it's not that the toxic leader is a mean person. It's not that they want to be toxic. Many times, I won't say the majority of the time, but maybe a lot of time, they don't even know that they're being toxic. They need somebody to come along beside them and say, hey, listen, this is what you're doing, and this is what you need to not do. This is what you need to do. Let me stand shoulder to shoulder with you. I'll watch you. I'll mentor you. We'll talk on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis, and we'll get you over this hump and help people out. The third thing I would say, Dave, and then I'll end on this, is that, and this kind of goes along with promote well, is that organizations need to not be afraid to demote well either. The worst thing that you can do is leave a toxic leader in place. And it doesn't mean you have to be mean about it and nasty, but when the time's right, if you've tried to retrain, and I do believe in that, retrain first. But if you've done that, you've put the effort in and the person's still toxic, it might be a time to demote, laterally move, or whatever you need to do to save your organization and save your people. So those are my three things: promote well, train and mentorship, and demote well.
I really like what you said about mentorship, because, as you know, we are the United States of the distracted.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that whole idea of mentorship that's awesome to bring that to our attention, and that's fantastic. So, thank you for for that. Yeah, there's got to be some systems and some ways that we can bring that into play, because the wisdom of people that have been there, done that, is can't even be measured, for that matter. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I was a platoon leader in the Army, a second lieutenant, I was horrible. I mean, I really was. I mean, I had my leadership strengths, but I also had significant leadership weaknesses. And I remember one of my leadership weaknesses was I was really in your face. I was probably toxic, but I would be in your face, and I wouldn't take anything from anybody. I was just really motivated, high energy. And I remember I had this sergeant first class. He's the platoon sergeant. And I went up to him one day, and something had happened, and I was just kind of railing on him a little bit. And I was telling him to do something, and I'll never forget what he said. This was a turning point in my leadership life. He let me rant and he let me rave. And at the end of it, he goes, "Sir, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but you don't have to be so mean about it."
Ooh.
And it really took me aback. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I think I apologized to him right there, or I may have apologized to him later. But I can tell you, I was a different leader after that, because he was a mentor to me. So you might not know how the military structure works, but platoon sergeants have usually been in the Army about 20 years. Platoon leaders have been in the Army about 20 days. So here's a guy that had been in the Army a long time, and he mentored me. He did it in a respectful way. He did it in a very direct and candid way. But he showed me my weakness, and I'm so thankful for him. And I'll name him because he probably won't watch this. Sergeant First Class Chandler, and I'll never forget him. And thank you, if you watch this, for helping me, Sergeant First Class Chandler, because it was a lesson I needed to learn.
What would you like to leave with people? You're working on a book as well, and you got some things going on. What would you like to leave with our listeners today, and how can they best, if you want people to contact you or find your information?
So I'm working on this book called Antidote. It's going to be about toxic leadership. I'm still working on the subtitle, but I'm about halfway through that. So be looking for that. And where you would find it would be, I have a ministry, a business called Living Life on Purpose. And you can find that at www.livinglifeonpurposetoday.com. And I have a lot of resources, books. I'm going to have some online courses there, ways to get in touch with me, and all those kinds of things. And like you, I'm a John Maxwell team trainer. And so I'm on the John Maxwell team site. I have a website there as well. And you can get to that website through the livinglifeonpurposetoday.com site.
Excellent. Well, such a pleasure to chat with you today. And I hope that this message gets out and makes an impact, because that's what life is all about, is making a difference, making an impact, and being available in these times for reaching out to people and being a point of encouragement, light, hope, and strength. So, Mark, great to talk with you today, and we look forward to blasting this out on our podcast.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, I really appreciate it, man. Great podcast, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll talk soon. Have a great day.
All right, you too.